As humans evolved throughout history, so did the ways that we used to kill other people. In prehistoric times, people used sticks, spears, and stones to kill other people. This was until humans had the ingenuity to create chariots that were efficient, effective, and expeditious. Then came the invention of the bow and arrow, used to shoot from far away, and the warship was created to commandeer and command the seas. Then came the invention of gunpowder, and cannons, and guns, and submarines, and bombs, and no matter how you look at this, as we have evolved throughout time, our ability to kill other humans has increased even more so. All this death and destruction that we cause to each other, it isn't worth it. What is war? What are the major causes of war? And how can we learn from history to prevent it? Is conflict and violence ingrained into human DNA? Us humans are really some of the only species that kill and exterminate other members of our species. However, there is a debate on this issue that still exists today. Are humans innately prone to self-species violence? Or is conflict and war a learned ability? Or is it perhaps a mixture of both? In general, the debate is leaning towards the latter answer, because the debate as simple as nature versus nurture doesn't apply to human psychology. It does seem to anthropologists that humans are inherently violent, as they discovered that humans regularly killed and fought each other. But civilization can't be discounted for the increase of conflicts, as generally humans were only murdered for their survival. As civilization evolved, so did man's capacity for conflict and war. When humans reproduce, we pass on our genetic traits and our culture and religion to our offspring. These biocultural traits diverged as we further evolved, and different cultures that may have had systemic differences in their beliefs and biology could be predisposed to conflict. In the paper, The Biology of Cultural Conflict by Gregory Burns and Scott Atran, differences in biological processes between people of different political views signify that different values can be caused by differences in people's physiology, and the same can be applied to persons' psychology. While most cultures have the same goods and bads that are a factor of fundamental human evolutionary psychology, smaller differences between cultures, such as the existence of God, causes different reactions from people that can make the grounds fertile for conflict. Multiply the differences between two people into differences between two cultures and thousands of people, and you have biocultural conflicts and wars. To delve further into this debate, one has to have accurate definitions of the nation and state, and know the differences between these two groups. Many people, including even some glossarists, historians, and philosophers, regularly confuse the terms nation and nation-state. Paul James defines the word nation nicely in his book Nation Formation. The nation is at once assumed to be a rich and inalienable relationship of specifiable compatriots. At the same time, it connects anonymous strangers, most of whom will never even pass each other on the street. Humans' biology, culture, and relationships, like those we stated in the previous segment, and some others fall under this factor. The state, however, is a much less ambiguous term. It is a polity, or political entity, that has a complete authority and a monopoly on power over pieces of land and or people. These two factors are generally what make up a country. Now, of course, there could be more of an influence from either factor that changes what kind of country it is. For example, a country that doesn't take the nation into account and exists merely because of the state can be deeply divided and can be unstable due to the resentment of the different groups towards the state. If the country is too much of a nation, then it can have an atmosphere ripe for nationalism and a government that is weak and unable to control the population. However, these factors also affect one another. A country that becomes too oppressive has revolution occur, and one that becomes anarchical creates a power vacuum that forces internal and external may fill. A great example of conflict and warfare propelled by the nation is Israel-Palestine, where the Jews of Israel and the Palestinian Arabs have been in near perpetual conflict since the 1940s. After Arabs settled in modern-day Levant and adopted the nationality Palestinian, and after Hitler gained power and subsequently killed millions of Jews, causing a mass exodus of Jews to Israel, the two groups were living together in the same land. These two groups of people have different cultures, and when the Jewish settlers occupied Greater Palestine, the Arabs of the region used those same Jewish settlers as an outgroup, an enemy to justify the Israeli-Arab War, a war of conquest. However, you can't discount the state as being a factor in this war, as the leaders of these states, these countries, needed to cling on to their power, and wanted to become more wealthy and prosperous than those that came before. Another good example of a war caused by the needs of the nation, and thus its people, is the American Revolutionary War. This war was caused mainly because the people were not represented in the British Parliament, and because they were being heavily taxed. The Stamp Act of 1765 is a great example of this, where the British colonies decided, without the 13 colonies pass, to tax them without warning. Americans had to pay very high taxes on everything from newspapers, printed documents, and playing cards, just to fund the British military. This, along with a new, growing sense of community between these Englishmen that now inhabited the colonies, and their loss of connection to their motherland, created a sense of nationalism. However, we can't deny the role the state has in conducting and continuing war, as it is the one that organized the formations of the army, the strategies on how to best beat the other side, the set of ground rules when declaring independence. It is here, however, where we start departing from the nation, and by consequence the people's needs, being the main cause of war. Because war cannot exist without the need for conflict, and organization of resources, be they military or otherwise. One such resource that could be gained through war is oil. And what does oil bring? Money. That is exactly what the Gulf War, a war fought between Iraq and Kuwait, with an international intervention force led by the United States, was fought for. When Iraq owed Kuwait $14 billion because they needed money to fight against Iran when they invaded them, they wanted Kuwait to forgive the loan. When Kuwait refused, the Iraqi government became overtly resentful of the Kuwaiti government. Iraq started blaming Kuwait for yearly billion-dollar losses. Do keep in mind that, as the French diplomat Eric Rouleau put it, the Iraqi people who were not consulted about this invasion have paid the price for their government's madness. This is referring to the action by the Allied forces that destroyed a vast majority of Iraqi infrastructure and economic capacity in the south. While the people did need economic aid due to the long-lasting effects of war and colonialism, this war was one that most benefited those in power, and thus the state, because the oil fields were meant to be controlled by state-sponsored oil companies, and the money those generated were used to keep Saddam Hussein's authoritarian grip on power intact. Then, there are the kinds of wars that are fought for control. These kinds of wars are started almost exclusively to benefit the state, with the nation's interests nowhere to be seen. Wars like Revolutionary Wars are wars for the nation's needs on the revolting side, but wars for state authority and control on the oppressive side. Then there are wars of conquest, which, while they may benefit the people through indirect side effects, are first and foremost done to increase the invading state's power and control over more and more land and people. One of the most prevalent and relevant examples of this type of cause is the Napoleonic Wars. After France had undergone an extensive revolution from 1789 to 1803 for the people to gain control of their resources in the nation, a power-hungry dictator came to power as a result of that very same insurrection. The people didn't have the power as Napoleon gained his. Yet he wanted more, so he invaded all the surrounding countries in Europe. These invasions, while they were popular among the French nation, did little to improve the conditions of the peasants who lived there. All these factors we have discussed so far in the video all apply as major factors in the cause of the most destructive series of wars ever known to man: the World Wars. The First and Second World War were incredibly complex and major conflicts that revolved around several causes. First off, throughout the history of the wars, there were always two types of nations and people who fought in the war. Those where nationalism was festering and highly effective, and those where people had been unsatisfied with their state of being in the system, thus consorting to different political ideologies, such as fascism and communism, and or unrest and revolution. These two types of nations aren't always mutually exclusive. A great example of this is Germany. Before and during World War I, Germans had a great sense of identity to their country and to their system of government. However, when they lost World War I and became utterly broken in system and nationality, the people became disillusioned and began turning to extreme ideologies. That is how Germany gained Hitler, and when they did, they once again had an extreme sense of self-identity, aligning it with their nationality and political beliefs. At the same time, there was a hugely entangled web of alliances between various states that each wanted their own goals of conquest and gaining of power to be met. So, when one chain on the web burst, the entire thing exploded like a pack of closely entangled mines. As we look to our history, we now see that war is most likely ingrained in our being, and that there can be many causes of war. However, history is worth nothing if we couldn't learn from it. So, the long-hanging question: how can we learn from history to prevent war in the future? The answer? We need to create institutions like the UN that can settle disputes and conflicts in a way that benefits the nation and forces the states that want to cause war to focus on their own countries. Since 1945, we have had institutions like the United Nations, which attempt to broker peace between countries that have had warlike ideas festering between them. However, the UN is very far from perfect. We have had so many wars occur even during the existence of this entity. The thing about this entity, however, is that it has no real power to do anything, to commit to any action, except when its member states say it can. The UN and other organizations like them aren't meant to be used as a last resort to stop war from happening, if it isn't. The most important solution that we need to stop wars is to have past knowledge of them, what causes them, and how to mediate them on as large a scale as possible. Education about mediation is the key to a world without war.